We're about to go on a journey to unearth a lost world, one that's just brimming with incredible wealth, fierce warriors, and artistry that could honestly rival any empire you can think of. This is a story that's been buried by time, but not anymore. So let's dig in. When you think about the ancient world, what comes to mind? Probably the pillars of Athens, right? Or maybe the legions of Rome. But we need to rewind the clock, way back to a time when those giants were, just finding their feet, before the golden age of Greece even really kicked off. And yeah, long before Rome became the master of the Mediterranean, casting its huge shadow over whole continents, there was another power, another whole civilization thriving right in the heart of ancient Europe, whose story has been pretty much buried by time. So that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, if they were so important, who were they? And why haven't we heard more about them? Well, the answer is Thrace, and the people, they were the Thracians. And look, this wasn't some small, isolated tribe we're talking about. This was a vast, really influential civilization that shaped the ancient world in ways we're only now finally beginning to understand. The Thracians were, well, they were a complex bunch. You had these legendary horsemen and absolutely formidable warriors for sure. But they were also deeply spiritual mystics, and this is the big one, goldsmiths, whose skills were just, wow, completely breathtaking. Okay, so to really get Thrace, you have to think a little differently. This wasn't a single unified empire like Rome with one emperor calling all the shots. Nope, it was this sprawling realm covering parts of modern-day Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, and it was made up of over 40 different tribes. So what held them all together? It wasn't a ruler. It was a powerful, shared culture. But this is where we get to the central mystery of the Thracians. It's the biggest hurdle for anyone trying to piece their story together. Think about this. For all their power, their influence, their incredible art, the Thracians left us no written language, no books, no histories, no letters. Zero. Their entire story exists without their own words to tell it. Which, of course, leads to the big question. If they didn't write anything down, how on earth do we know their story? How do we even begin to reconstruct their world? Well, we have to become historical detectives, right? We have to follow the clues they did leave behind. And they left some amazing ones. We've got these massive burial mounds, tombs just packed with incredible golden treasures, ceremonial armor, these amazing ritual masks. And, this is super important, we have the writings of their neighbors, people like the ancient Greeks, who actually wrote a lot about them. So what did the Greeks have to say? First off, that the Thracians were just everywhere. The historian Herodotus claimed they were the second most populous people in the known world, right behind the people of India. So these were not minor players on the world stage by any stretch. They were also known for being absolutely ferocious in battle. I mean, the Greeks, who were definitely no strangers to warfare themselves, they respected and feared Thracian warriors. They described them with this raw, almost primal intensity. And then there's this, and it's a big one. The Greeks freely admitted that when it came to working with gold, the Thracians were just in a league of their own. Their artistry was legendary, even back then. So who was running the show in this huge, powerful, and artistic civilization? To get a handle on their society, we really need to look at their leaders, the god-chosen kings. See, a Thracian king wasn't just a politician or a general. He was seen as this semi-divine figure. The belief was that these rulers were literally handpicked by the gods, that they were protected by powerful spirits, and that when they died, they wouldn't just die. They'd be transformed into immortal heroes. And this isn't some new idea. This tradition of divine kings goes back over 3,000 years. By the 5th century BCE, Greek historians were already writing about their immense power. And by the 4th century BCE, we're talking the age of Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great, Thracian culture hit its absolute peak of influence and artistic achievement. And that artistic achievement, that brings us to their ultimate legacy. Because, when a civilization doesn't leave you any books, its story has to be told in other ways. For the Thracians, that story was told in gold. The Thracians basically communicated everything. Their beliefs, their power, their ideas about the afterlife, all of it came through their art. Their gold isn't just pretty decoration, it is their history. It's their voice speaking to us across thousands of years. And we're not just talking about some pretty jewelry here. We're talking about the most sophisticated, most advanced gold work found anywhere in ancient Europe. The techniques they used, the sheer detail, it was simply unmatched. It's proof that their genius just showed up in a different way, not through writing, but through metal. You know, the story of Thrace is such a powerful reminder that history is just full of these silent voices and lost worlds. It really makes you wonder if a civilization this vast, this sophisticated, could be almost completely forgotten, how many other great stories are still out there, buried right under our feet, just waiting to be unearthed? All right, today we're diving deep into the secrets of an ancient civilization and one of their most profound rituals. But here's the twist. It's not about mourning. It's about a magnificent, otherworldly ascension. So just think about it for a second. How do we view death today? For most of us, it's an end, right? A final stop. But what if a whole culture, a powerful ancient culture, saw it completely differently? Not as the end of the story, but as a doorway to something way, way bigger. Well, for the ancient Thracians, that's exactly what it was. Death wasn't an end. It was a sacred transformation. It was a journey where a king could become truly immortal. And you know what? They left behind this incredibly detailed roadmap showing us exactly how they believed it worked. So let's start with the first step on this incredible journey. It begins with a really powerful symbol, something meant to, you could say, literally reshape the face of death itself, a golden mask. And we're talking about absolutely breathtaking works of art here. Take the famous Mask of Thrace, for example. It's made from solid gold, a metal they believed was divine, incorruptible, connected to the sun. And it's this stunningly lifelike portrait of a king. But here's the key. It was so much more than just decoration. This was a sacred tool, designed to get the king's spirit ready for the journey ahead. Okay, so this mask had 3 really important jobs to do. First, it was all about transformation. It basically leveled up the dead king to the status of a divine ancestor, joining the ranks of heroes. Second, it was a spiritual shield. Think of it like this gleaming armor protecting his soul from any evil stuff on the journey through the underworld. And last, it was a statement, a big one. It declared that this king's rule was now eternal, that it went way beyond the mortal world. But a king can't make a journey like that alone, right? He needed a guide, a companion strong enough to carry his soul all the way to the heavens. And for that, he had his most trusted horse. And get this, the king's horse was treated with just as much respect as the king himself. This wasn't some symbolic gesture. It was a critical part of the whole ascension process. The horse was decked out, armored up, and placed right there in the tomb, all set for its divine mission. And this idea, by the way, it goes way back, connecting directly to ancient Indo-European myths where sacred horses and kings were totally intertwined. All right, so the king's new identity is secure. He's got his ride ready. What's next? He needed to connect with the divine realm he was about to join. And how did they do that? Through a pretty ecstatic ritual. Now, what's fascinating is that long before the Greeks, the Thracians were worshipping Dionysus, the god of wine and, well, ecstasy. Rulers would use these incredible gold vessels to lead ceremonies with sacred wine, and this wine could actually induce trances, literally bridging the gap between our world and the divine. It was all a symbol of the king's deep, personal connection to the gods and to nature itself. Okay, on to the final stage of the physical journey, the king's tomb. But I want you to forget everything you think you know about tombs, because for the Thracians, this wasn't a final resting place. No, it was a portal. Yeah, these were not simple graves. We're talking about highly sophisticated cosmic gateways. The tombs were usually circular, to represent eternity, and lined with stone to last forever. But what's absolutely incredible is that they were often perfectly aligned with the stars and planets. Imagine, aligned with the sun on the winter solstice, all designed to help the king's soul launch into the divine realm at just the right, most powerful moment. And if you could look inside these magnificent tombs, like the famous ones at Kazanlak or Svishtari, you'd see the most incredible scenes from the afterlife. The walls literally tell the story. You have these beautiful paintings showing the final moments of the king's journey. Goddesses greeting him, ritual dances, even a divine coronation as he finally enters the realm of the immortals. The entire story of his ascension, painted to last for eternity. It's just wow. So when you put it all together, what's the big takeaway? It's that every single ritual, the golden mask, the sacred horse, the cosmic tomb, it was all part of one single powerful belief. To the Thracians, death wasn't a tragedy you mourn. It was a glorious, carefully orchestrated ascension to a higher state of being. It really makes you think, doesn't it? When we look at these ancient, elaborate ceremonies, all designed to elevate a soul, it kind of makes you reflect on our own world. What are the masks, the horses, the sacred wines of our time? What rituals really define how we say our goodbyes?
Your head around this. A civilization that had mastered gold thousands of years before the Egyptian pyramids were even a thing. This is way more than just a story about riches. It's about a lost language of power. Okay, so picture this. It's the 19th and 20th centuries, and archaeologists are poking around the rolling hills of what we now call Bulgaria. Back then, it was known as Thrace, and for the longest time, these hills were just, well, hills. But little did anyone know, a secret had been hiding just beneath the surface for thousands of years. So archaeologists find literally thousands of these burial mounds, these tumuli. They start digging, expecting to find the usual stuff, maybe some clay pots, a few simple tools. But what they actually found, no one, and I mean no one, was prepared for it. When they finally broke through, it was unbelievable. This wasn't just a few items, it was a hoard. We're talking solid gold masks, incredibly detailed gold crowns, heavy gold necklaces, even gold-plated armor and gear for their horses. The scale of it was just staggering. Some of these treasures weighed kilograms. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a nice little surprise. For the archaeologists who found it, this was a massive professional shock. These were seasoned experts, right? And what they were uncovering just didn't fit with anything they thought they knew about human civilization. It was too old, too sophisticated, and there was just way too much of it. And that right there brings us to the most mind-blowing part of this whole discovery, because this wasn't just any ancient treasure. It wasn't the weight or the shine that stunned them the most. It was the age. They pretty quickly realized they were looking at some of the very first gold ever to be shaped and worked by human hands. 4,500 BCE. Just let that date sink in for a second. That's thousands of years before the Roman Empire, thousands of years before classical Greece, and yeah, even thousands of years before the Great Pyramids of Egypt were built. This timeline really puts it all into perspective. The Thracians had already mastered goldsmithing by 4,500 BCE. The first Egyptian dynasty? That wouldn't even get started for another 1,400 years. And the Great Pyramid of Giza? That was still 2,000 years in the future. This discovery didn't just add to the history books, it completely flipped them upside down. The ground zero for all this was a place called the Varna Necropolis. Found back in 1972, this one site in Bulgaria officially holds the record. It is, to this day, the oldest major gold treasure ever found on the entire planet, buried alongside powerful kings and warriors. But believe it or not, the incredible age of the gold was only half the story. The other half was the skill, the absolutely breathtaking craftsmanship that left archaeologists totally speechless. I mean, they were hammering gold into perfect sheets that were just millimeters thin. They were crafting these super detailed animal figures and sacred symbols with a kind of precision that just screams they had advanced tools we know nothing about. And here's the kicker. Even today, with all our modern technology, we don't fully understand how they pulled some of this off. Their techniques are still a bit of a mystery, a testament to a lost world of absolute genius. Which brings us to the final and really the most important question. Why? Why so much gold? Why go to all this incredible effort? Well, the answer shows us that for the Thracians, gold was so much more than just money. To them, gold was basically a language. It wasn't something you used to buy stuff. No, it was a powerful, physical symbol that communicated all the big things in life: a ruler's power, a connection to the gods, their identity as a people, and even their belief in an afterlife. So, by controlling the creation and the use of these almost divine objects, Thracian kings weren't just men anymore. They elevated themselves. They became living myths, people who held a power that seemed to come directly from the heavens. And we actually know this because ancient Greek writers saw them doing it and wrote about it. They said the Thracians used gold for everything that mattered. They used it to seal political deals, to reward their bravest warriors, to make offerings to their gods, to decorate their armor, and, most importantly, to mark a king's divine right to rule. This wasn't a world of spreadsheets and bank accounts. It was a world where power and glory and your connection to the divine were spoken through the gleam of perfectly crafted gold.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about. For the Thracians, gold was the ultimate symbol, their undisputed language of power. And it really makes you wonder, what serves that role for us today? What material, what idea, what technology is our language of power?
You know, when we think about the ancient world, our minds usually jump to the philosophers of Athens or the legions of Rome. But there was this other power, a kingdom of, well, legendary warriors and incredible golden treasures that both of those empires really respected and maybe even feared. Today, we're going to uncover the lost story of Thrace's warrior kings.
It sounds a little like the start of a riddle, right? A mythical hero, a political mastermind, and a figure literally immortalized in metal. But the answer connects them across centuries of war, gold, and a whole lot of power. And the answer is Thrace. It was this kingdom of incredible fighters and just immense wealth, kind of sandwiched between the great powers of its day. To really get what made these rulers so formidable, we're going to explore the lives of three of their most famous kings.
So we're going to start not in history, but in pure legend. Our first king is Rhesus, a figure so epic, he was actually written into one of the greatest stories ever told, the Trojan War.
Yeah, in Homer's Iliad, Rhesus isn't just another king showing up for the fight, he's basically a force of nature. He storms into the Trojan War with these amazing, snow-white horses and armor that literally shines like the sun. I mean, even in a war that's already packed with legendary heroes, this guy stands out as someone to be truly afraid of.
And get this, the armor wasn't just some master craftsmanship. The myth was that it was a divine creation, made by the gods themselves. This is actually our first big hint at a core Thracian belief, that their kings kind of walked this line between mortal power and divine right, a direct link to the gods.
Okay, so that's the myth. But what happens when we move out of the legends and into the hard facts of history? Well, that's where we meet Sitalkes, a king who didn't just inspire legends, he built a real-world empire.
And this right here isn't poetry. This is a cold, hard military assessment from the great historian Thucydides. He's basically telling us that the Thracian army under Sitalkes was on a whole other level, a superpower whose sheer numbers the Greeks just couldn't compete with.
So how did he pull it off? First, he did what pretty much everyone thought was impossible. He united all these fiercely independent Thracian tribes. With that powerful foundation, he carved out a massive kingdom. And then, he started playing the great game of geopolitics, making alliances and challenging the big dogs like Athens and Sparta head-on.
So, Sitalkes basically transformed Thrace from just a collection of tribes into a unified political and military machine. He took that legendary reputation of warriors like Rhesus and forged it into real, tangible power that could actually change the course of history.
So we've seen the myth, we've seen the history. Now, we turn to archaeology, and this is where the story gets even more incredible. Let's talk about Seuthes III, a king whose legacy was, quite literally, dug out of the ground.
Just one number on the screen, but it's a huge one, 2004. I mean, in the grand timeline of history, that's practically yesterday. This was the year the world got a stunning reminder of the incredible wealth and power of these Thracian kings.
For over 2,000 years, the tomb of Seuthes III just lay there, totally undisturbed. It's one of Europe's greatest archaeological finds, for sure. But what exactly was inside that so completely stunned the world?
Well, it was a treasure trove fit for a god, a gleaming gold wreath to crown him in the afterlife, his armor and weapons ready for celestial battles, and even his war horses, sacrificed so they could ride with him into eternity. This wasn't just a burial. It was a king's entire world, all packed up for the next life.
But among all that gold and all that bronze, this was the absolute showstopper. A lifelike, breathtakingly detailed bronze head of Seuthes himself. And just like that, he wasn't just some name from history anymore. You could actually look into his eyes. It's one of the most personal connections we have to any ruler from the ancient world. It's just incredible.
So what does all this amazing treasure really tell us? It shows that a Thracian king wasn't just a ruler. He was seen as a semi-divine hero. His lavish tomb was basically a gateway, designed to make sure he would go from being a powerful man on Earth to an immortal in the afterlife.
All right, so we've met the myth, the empire builder, and the Golden King. What does putting them all together really tell us about the Thracian legacy of power? It's like each king represents a different pillar of Thracian power.
Rhesus, he gives them their legendary reputation. Sitalkes forges that reputation into a real-world empire. And Seuthes III, he reveals the whole belief system that held it all together, this idea of a divine kingship that promised an eternity of glory.
And that is really the ultimate takeaway here. To be a Thracian king was to be something more. It was this unique identity that fused the ferocity of a warrior, the spiritual authority of a priest, and the undeniable power that comes with just, well, immense golden wealth.
And here's a final thought to leave you with. The capital city of Seuthes himself, a place called Seuthopolis, is currently submerged under a reservoir. It's just waiting for its secrets to be fully uncovered. It really makes you wonder, what other treasures, what other kings, are still waiting out there in the earth, ready to completely rewrite the history we think we know? Okay, so picture this. A civilization that was right up there with the Greeks and Persians, a real powerhouse in the ancient world. Now, imagine they just vanished. Today, we're going to talk about the Thracians, a people who, despite all their power, basically disappeared from history, leaving behind this huge, echoing silence and one single, glittering clue.
Just try to imagine it. You're walking through a landscape that's just full of ghosts. Where you'd expect to see busy markets and huge fortresses, there's just nothing. After the Romans came through, the very heart of their society just stopped beating. Their great cities were left behind, just to crumble back into the earth.
And it wasn't just their buildings that went quiet. It was their actual voice. I mean, think about all the sounds that make up a culture, right? The stories people tell around a fire, the songs, the everyday chatter, all of it, just gone. They didn't leave behind a written language, so their whole way of seeing the world just faded out of existence.
And this might be the deepest cut of all. The names of their kings, their heroes, even their gods, completely forgotten. It's the ultimate disappearing act, when a whole people's identity just gets wiped from memory. It's almost like they were never even here. A total historical dead end. But here's the thing, it's not.
And this is where the story gets really wild. Because on one side of the coin, you have a complete cultural wipeout. We're talking abandoned cities, a lost language, zero written records, basically the ghost of a civilization. But on the other side, something did make it through. Something brilliant, something that doesn't tarnish, something impossibly beautiful, their gold.
And this is the moment everything changes for their story. Because, stone crumbles, words fade, but gold lasts. It became this kind of accidental historian for a lost people, a silent witness that was finally ready to start talking.
So how in the world do you read a history that's written in metal? What kinds of secrets are locked away in these amazing treasures? To figure that out, we've got to decode what the gold itself is trying to tell us about the Thracian world.
So what you're looking at here is basically the table of contents for a history book that was never written down. The gold tells us they were absolute masters of their craft, way ahead of their time. It shows us they weren't just some isolated tribe. No, they were a major cultural force, influencing their very famous neighbors. And through these incredible artifacts, we get glimpses of their sacred rituals, hinting at a deep belief in immortality. And maybe the wildest part? They built these powerful kingdoms and this incredible culture without a single written record. Their whole story was told through art and faith, not ink.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Every little detail on a vase, every ceremonial mask, every piece of jewelry, it's like a word or a sentence or a whole chapter in their story. They just chose to write their history in a different language, one that would end up outlasting empires.
So this brings us to the bigger picture. What does the survival of all this golden treasure really tell us about history and, about what actually lasts?
If there's one thing history teaches us over and over again, it's that pretty much everything is temporary. Great civilizations, they can vanish. The most powerful empires, they eventually fall. And even the most famous names, the ones we think will last forever, can be forgotten. It's just the natural cycle of things.
But, and this is the incredible lesson from the Thracians, something can break that cycle. A true legacy, something real that you can hold, something that carries both beauty and meaning. Well, that can achieve a kind of immortality. It speaks a language that everyone understands, one that doesn't need any translation, no matter how much time passes.
Look, the Thracian kings and queens are long gone, but their story isn't silent, not at all. It's glowing in museum cases all around the world, and it's whispering from the earth in these dusty valleys where people are still digging.
It's telling the story of this powerful, complex world that Europe and history almost completely forgot.
So that kind of leaves us with a question for ourselves, doesn't it? The Thracians left their gold. What are we making that's going to outlast us? What are the artifacts, the ideas, the gold that we're creating today that will tell our story to a future that might not remember our names?